All right, let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Margaret-Ann and I'm on the product team here at Statsig, and I'll be hosting this webinar today with Tor. And we're going to be talking about feature flags and feature management overall. So before we get started, I wanted to actually do intros. So Tor, do you want to kick us off with a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Tor. I've been working on the SDKs and integrations team here at Statsig for the past 2 years. Really passionate about helping people get up and running, whether that's using Statsig in their mobile app or on a web server, wherever that may be, a web app. We're here to help. So yeah, prior to Statsig, I was at Facebook for a little bit over 5 years working on product teams and using a lot of the great, feature gating and experimentation tools that they have there. So it was fun to jump ship and work on those a little bit. How about you, May?
Awesome. Yeah. So somewhat similar story. I've been at Statsig for about a year, as I mentioned, on the product team. And before Statsig, I was at bigger companies, namely Uber for a little over 6 years and Facebook before then, where I got to work with just awesome in-house tooling to manage feature rollouts and A/B tests and just make that really smooth. And I don't think you realize how good those internal tools are until you leave. So I was really excited to get to work on, similarly awesome tools outside of big companies that kind of democratize access to those types of tools. Okay, great. So jumping in here, feature gates, we're going to talk a little bit about what feature flags are, how they work, when to use them, etc. But before we dive in, I actually want to do a little note on nomenclature. So you've probably heard the term feature flags or feature toggles. Both of those are very industry standard terms for feature gates. Here at Statsig, we call them feature gates, which is our internal branded version. But really, all three of these concepts are the same. So you'll hear us kind of interchangeably using feature flag, feature toggle, feature gate. It's all the same thing. So with that out of the way, let's jump in. Feature gates. First question that I always get, especially from folks who maybe aren't software developers, is what is a feature gate? So I want to turn that back to you, Tor. How would you describe feature gates?
Yeah, this is a good starting point. So feature gates are software switches that control access to a block of code or a particular feature, right? And this is incredibly important in modern software development because the release cycle for software is essentially continuous at this point, right? So maybe not if there's some mobile developers that are listening in and they're saying, hey, I've got to get my App Store approval still. And that's true, but in any case, the time that it takes to develop a feature is actually longer than the time that it takes to release software. And so having actually then a software switch or toggle that you can use to adjust which code is running or which features are available in real time allows you to develop and release this code whenever it's ready. Beyond that, it actually allows you to have, specific targeting criteria for eligibility of a certain code path or feature, all with actually without writing code to determine that, right? So you don't have to statically decide ahead of time, we're going to check and make sure the user is in the United States. You can just add that criteria to your flag later. So you might not even know if you're only going to, launch this feature in North America first. And so you can actually adjust that later in real time.
That's pretty powerful. Yeah, I can't even count the number of times where we felt constrained by a mobile release build schedule or, just less flexibility built in than we might want. And so being able to kind of add those parameters that are then a bit more dynamic through some sort of a decoupled interface is pretty powerful. So that's a feature flag overall, great concept. I get it. What makes Statsig's feature gates specifically unique?
Yeah, so our offering has added this layer of analytics on top of the feature gate, right? So anytime you're rolling out a gate or a feature, you're doing a progressive rollout and you start with, some small percentage. So you start with like 10% of your users. That creates this natural bifurcation of your user base between, the 10% of people that have access to the feature and then the 90% of people who don't. And so because we're actually tying this back to events and metrics on the back end, we know, for the users who were in a particular group, what their behavior actually was and how that feature is actually performing overall relative to your key performance indicators. So, a lot of people today are still rolling out a feature, or picking kind of like a cohort of users, or a certain time to launch something, and then kind of watching their dashboards and trying to piece together what's happening, versus being able to directly tie those two things together and understand, like, okay, this 10% of my audience had the feature and it caused this metric to move up or down.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. I mean, I've experienced the whole spectrum in the less sophisticated organizations I've been a part of. It's kind of launch and then sit in a room and be like, oh, that kind of corresponds.
Yeah.
That little bump on the chart corresponds. Do not recommend. And in the more sophisticated organizations, it would be more like, okay, we launched, then a week later, we're running an offline analysis. We have like a full-time data scientist kind of dedicated to it. Neither of which are particularly streamlined. So being able to kind of couple that launch and analytics just automatically built in to understand those lifts is pretty awesome.
Yeah, super powerful.
That's very cool. So this seems kind of like a magic bullet tool. Are there any times when you may not want to use a feature gate? How would you think about deciding when to deploy or not deploy a feature gate?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that I've seen kind of more generally in our Slack community. Folks asking, like, how does the Statsig team use feature gates?
Yeah.
And we of course use Statsigs ourselves every day. We'll talk more about that later. But I think it's really this kind of spectrum that each engineering organization has to kind of figure out where they fall on the spectrum, from we're never going to gate anything to we're always going to gate every single feature. And that's not saying you'll be on either end. You might start on one end or the other and kind of move around through your journey. But sometimes on the one end of, like, I'm not going to use a feature gate is, maybe it adds a lot of overhead, and you're doing like a CSS change on your website or something on the front end like that, which is it's really tricky, right? To check a gate there. And it can be easier just to, let's create landing page V2 and let's just, fork the logic there and just iterate in that little environment, rather than having to worry about figuring out how to check a gate in that environment or things like that. So there are times where it can add some overhead for sure to use a gate. And then in the other camp is people who are like, what, even if it adds overhead, figure out a way to check that gate, pass it down from the server, or whatever it is. And so some people in that camp might even say, like, okay, obviously, if I'm building a new feature, I'm going to add a feature gate for this, but also maybe I'm putting together a bug fix. I'm going to put that behind a gate and roll that out gradually as well. And that tends to get a little bit more controversial, right? Some people are like, no, if it's a bug fix, you fix the bug, you put it in, you get it out there. And then, we have these debates internally as well. And other people are saying, well, how do I know that I actually fixed the bug and didn't cause another regression? I want to gradually roll that out and make sure I'm not making things worse. And I'm actually, causing that metric to return to where I expect it to, right? And so those little debates are things that'll probably have to happen within your organization as you decide where you fall on that spectrum. Yeah,
that's a pretty extreme stance to knowingly gate some users out of a bug fix, even if it's causing a suboptimal experience. That's pretty intense. Actually,
I think even if you're in that.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, even if you're in that camp, I think, you're still pushing to get that fix out to as many people as quickly as possible. So no one's advocating for, keeping a buggy experience for their users.
Yeah, totally. I was going to ask, actually, have you been in a scenario where you did gate a bug fix and then you kind of were able to quantify the impact of that fix?
Yeah, I think back in my time at Facebook, there was early on in COVID, a big kind of, capacity crunch, right? Because all of a sudden everybody was staying home and everyone was using, a number of different services, a lot more than capacity planning teams have really planned for, right? And so they've got, they're limited by how fast they can pour concrete for data centers and things like that. And they've got, multi-year roadmaps. And then all of a sudden COVID comes along and there's these huge spikes in usage across these products. And so there was this huge, focus on performance and is there anywhere that you can squeeze out, a little bit more CPU wins or memory or things like that. And so they actually created this huge web of feature gates that you would have different tiers of gates. So this is like, a tier 3 gate. And so we're going to turn those off because, capacity is getting limited, versus tier 1 is like, let's turn off all of, feed ranking. Super, super extreme. We hope it doesn't get to that, but if we need more CPU, that's a knob we can turn, right? And so while I was working through that, trying to find some performance wins and things like that, I found there was this games. I was on the games team at the time. There was a little gaming related widget that rendered on like the sidebar when you logged into facebook.com on your desktop. And I found that was actually like taking like 0.1% of, global CPU usage at Facebook just to, load the data and render that thing on people's home feeds. And so we put a gate in there for that and tried to measure, what is the impact of actually removing this, and found that it really wasn't worth the trade-off. I think we ended up removing the feature ultimately and found that it was, 0.1% of global CPU might not sound like a lot to a lot of people out there, but at Facebook scale or Google or Uber or those sorts of big tech companies, that's millions of dollars a year in CPU usage.
Wow. That's impressive. It's cool to be able to quantify it though. You can easily point to the impact that you've had or your team has had, especially on the top line initiative like that. So speaking of performance, kind of switching gears a little bit, I'm curious because you actually designed and built some of the original FeatureGate architecture. What are, some of the original assumptions that you made in the design that have held up? And then what are some things that have actually been challenged and have had to evolve over time?
Yeah, really good question. I think one of the ones that did not hold up was, I remember we had a lot of conversations early on about what the unit type should be for a gate. And that's, if we're going to check against a gate and we want to do a percentage rollout, we want to get the same stable experience for that user. But the debate was kind of between, should, a logged in user get the same experience if they're logged in on desktop and mobile, 2 different devices, or should the same user on the same device get the same experience from going from, a logged out experience to a logged in experience? And we decided, we need to focus first on like the logged in case, right? But very quickly after that, people were asking us, hey, I need to gate this login boundary, or we're running an experiment where we're trying to get more people to log into our product, right? Yeah. Very, very common experimentation scenario.
Landing page optimization, totally.
Yeah, exactly. Very common flow to experiment on. And so we were like, well, they're right. But we need to be able to do both, actually. And then we realized, actually, we don't just need those 2 cases. We also need to be able to roll out like on a particular custom unit ID that might only apply to this one company, right? So like you might need to roll this out, like say you are Notion and you have a bunch of different projects, right? You have the project for your company. And so you want everyone in that project to get the same experience. So you need a project ID that you can roll out across. Or if you're an enterprise software company, it might be companies that you're rolling out to, things like that. And so that was, an assumption early on that we didn't really realize we would need so many different types of things to work concurrently, and maybe the same company would have an experiment that would run both on kind of the logged out case and then also on a specific project ID or something like that.
Yeah, no, that definitely, even here at Statsig, like when we run our experiments or roll out our feature gates, it's usually on company ID as the unit type, because we want to control for the experience within a company. We don't want a scenario where like I'm sitting at my desk and Tori, you're sitting next to me and we have totally different versions of Statsig. That's always, I guess they would know we dog food our own products, but it's not ideal. So we tend to use company ID, which is a great example of a new ID type that you guys had to build for, clearly. Definitely.
And I think back to your original question, it was also kind of what assumptions did hold up, or what things did we think through well. I think one of those was just when we were designing our first server SDKs that were going to evaluate conditions locally rather than like requiring a network request for every single check. And we were worried at the time that, we're going to add these other conditions later on, and we're going to have to update all the SDKs, and people aren't going to update their SDKs and things like that. And so we tried to bake in as many of those ahead of time, before you could even create these specific types of conditions. And so we've had to add support for things over time, of course, like notably like ID lists or layers. I think even custom IDs weren't originally a part of it, right? But for the most part, a lot of those conditions that we baked in ahead of time, we haven't had to add a bunch of new ones, and we've been able to roll out new features just on the console side without making some of those changes. So we were fairly aware of the different sets of things people would need to roll out on.
That's impressive foresight.
Kind of lucky, maybe more than anything.
Or good luck. Yeah, there you go. One or the other.
All right. Well, that's been enough for me. I think I need to turn the tables on you a little bit, MA. So one of the great parts of Statsig is that, you know, we don't charge per seat, right? We want everyone in your organization to be there. And there's actually a ton of tools just in the console, not just for engineers who are maybe building a new feature, but also for data scientists who are helping analyze that, or some of your leadership trying to see what sorts of experiments you're running, what's been successful, and PMs, of course, too. So MA, as a PM, as you're helping, you know, shepherd new features here at Statsig, how are you using feature gates, and how are you managing that whole life cycle of a feature?
That's a great question. And actually something pretty topical right now, because we've been introducing a lot of new tools to manage the feature gate lifecycle. But I'll talk you a little bit through my process and how we think about it on the Statsig team. So we start really, you know, we're developing a new feature, it's getting ready to launch. We typically have a conversation up front, which is this a gate or is this an experiment? And if it's, you know, a multivariate hypothesis driven kind of thing that we want to test, we'll use an experiment. If it's just a, you know, iteration on an existing feature or kind of a net new feature experience, we'll usually use a gate. And so, you know, we'll have that decision. The engineer will then instrument accordingly. And then the first real step in the life cycle is dog fooding. So we have a kind of set of segments that we use internally as our standard dog fooding segments. I believe it's called employees who demo, and it's all the employees of the company with a few key folks excluded, namely our sales folks who demo externally and don't maybe want gotcha half-baked, you know, dog fooding features showing up in their live demos. So we'll actually exclude them so they don't have any surprises. And then we'll do a round of dog fooding. Once it looks good to go, we'll start the rollout. And the rollout typically looks like a few friendly companies to start with, maybe the companies who have requested the feature, we can kind of give them early beta access. Then we'll do, you know, a 50% rollout. We'll look at the metrics over the course of a week or so, 2 weeks maybe. And then, you know, we'll make a call. We'll say, is this a good feature or is this a bad feature? If it's good, we'll launch to 100%. If it's bad, we'll actually turn it off. We'll go to 0%. And we'll set a default value and call it a day. About once a month or so, we do like a cleanup session. We actually do like a fun team lunch. We'll get into a room, we'll have lunch, we'll clean up all our old feature gates. And we use some of the tools that we've recently launched to kind of filter down for experiments that, you know, have either not had any checks recently or have been at 100% or 0% for a while, and we actually want to archive them. So we archive these gates, we clear them out of the code, and this helps us just maintain kind of a clutter-free console. And it's nice now that we have these tools. And as we started using these tools, we actually added some nudges in to automate this process. I think we now have this monthly on the calendar, but it's nice to kind of get a reminder ping to go clean up some of these gates over time. So we've now actually ended up rolling out that feature to all of our customers. So we actually kind of proactively reach out and remind you to clean up old flags. So that's a quick overview of our process.
Yeah, that's great. I know people have been asking for some of those nudges and things for a while, and it's good to have those reminders.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we built it so that it can come via email, it can come via Slack, whatever kind of mode of communication you use. We're a workplace company. We have not yet built a workplace integration. Maybe we will do that at some point. But it's meant to be kind of a push model instead of a pull model. Awesome. So, you know, I think we've talked a little bit about what is a feature gate, how do you use them, when to use them, some of the architecture decisions that the Statsig team made early on. I'm curious though, now that, you know, feature gates have been out in the wild for 2-ish years, what have been some creative use cases that you've seen people use feature gates for, or that you personally have used feature gates for?
Yeah, there's a few really cool ones that come to mind, actually. So I think probably the first one is just people using feature gates or experiments for rolling out and testing different machine learning workflows that they have, different machine learning models. I've seen this go from, just quick little feature gates testing out the new model, or, a full-on experiment with like 10 different variants of, this ML model or things like that. And so if you're interested in that, I think we're actually doing that in our learning lab next month. So definitely stay tuned and watch out for an invite to that. I think another one I saw pretty early on, probably a year and a half ago or so, was someone using a feature gate to test a different JSON parsing library on their backend, which is super cool because, a lot of times when you say A/B testing, people are thinking of, red button versus
button colors.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but this was a case where I think they were using the VM ID or something like that as the unit of randomization there. So rolling out to 10% of VMs and using one implementation, and then actually measuring like the memory footprint and the CPU usage of two different JSON parsing libraries. So super cool, and something that I'm sure a lot of people could benefit from, actually kind of challenging some of those assumptions or things that you're using and finding a more optimal one. And then the other really inspiring thing actually at this point now is just looking around and seeing how Statsig is out there, like in the real world, in a lot of different ways. So like some people are using feature gates on like a bike share, unlocking a bike and trying to experiment on unlock rates and things like that, or even out like at a restaurant at a point of sale system or something like that. So definitely out there in the wild.
That's neat. That's very cool. I'm gonna have to like look around me next time I'm out. Feel like, where is Statsig that I might not expect Statsig? So these are obviously like success stories, right? This is where feature gates are being deployed in creative ways. Things are working well. Values being added. But I always like to also touch on the horror stories, or the places where feature gates are, feature gates gone wrong, basically. Do you have any personal stories of when either you forgot to use a feature gate or you misused a feature gate, and kind of what happened there?
Yeah, I think unfortunately a few too many instances come to mind. Kind of an interesting one was very early on in Statsig. This is maybe a couple months in, and we were trying to roll something out on our API servers. And we were like, well, wouldn't it be great if we had a service that could help us do a progressive rollout? Oh my gosh, we have one right here. It's called Statsig. We should be using a gate for this, right? And so this was like the first time we tried to do that on our API servers. We were already doing it on our console and things like that. But this version of our server SDK super early on would just make a network request to Statsig for every single gate check and say, hey, what's the value of this gate, basically, right? So we check in the code and we push this to production, and a request comes into the API and it says, okay, well, in order to serve this request, I need to know the gate value from Statsig. So request comes into the API. I need to know the value of the gate to serve this request. Request goes up. Yeah, and you see where this is going, right? So we ended up with this kind of infinite loop crashing our servers. And fortunately, we were able to identify and fix it pretty quickly. But yeah, that was definitely a bad one. We were fortunate that it was very early on in our history, and we didn't really have any customers at the time. So just because of our own usage that we noticed that one, and we're able to roll out features, gradually across all of our different services at this point, which is super, super important for us. But yeah, that was definitely a horror story. I'm not sure if you saw Vineeth's blog post about kind of a similar idea, but happening at a very large company where they actually lost like $500,000 from poor feature flag usage. There's a good learning in here. I promise.
If I remember correctly, it wasn't $500,000; it was $500 million.
Oh, did I? Yeah. Sorry, $500 million. Yes, definitely check out that blog post if you want to see the full story. But I'll try to give a little bit of an overview here. This was the company was called Knight Capital, and they were one of the largest traders in U.S. equities in 2012, like $21 billion a day, thanks to their high frequency trading algorithms. And so they were developing a new feature, and this was to handle some transactions in a new New York Stock Exchange program. And to control this feature, they decided they would repurpose a feature gate that they already had for a test trading algorithm. And maybe you can already see where this is going to go a little bit, but yes. So they deployed the code for this new feature, and 7 of the servers got the update, but it failed to deploy on one of the servers. So it's still running the old code where this gate is gating the test algorithm, right? And when they toggled that gate on, all of them got the update. And then that one server with the bad binary started executing trades that resulted in a $440 million loss. Ooh. So yeah, fortunately we had our bad outage when we didn't have any customers, but if you were dealing with real money, you can make very, very big mistakes here. And so the lesson there is pretty simple. Don't reuse your gate, right? I mean, gates are cheap. Gates are free.
Well, good thing. Yes, this is why we don't charge per gate. We don't charge per MAU. It's unlimited gates, unlimited MAU, unlimited everything, because you should be creating a new one. You should not be reusing feature gates. Yes. Bad things will happen. Yes. And hopefully you don't lose $440 million in the process. Yes. Awesome. Okay. Well, Tor, thank you. This was fabulous. Thank you for sharing, your vast treasure trove of knowledge and experiences using feature gates. Before we move into Q&A, I did want to mention that if anything piqued your interest in this session, we did just roll out a really awesome, generous package. It's called our feature management package, and it's basically unlimited free feature flags with no analytics up to 500 million gate checks. So this is super generous, lowers the barrier of entry. You can just kind of get up and running today. And so when we send out the follow-up email from this session, we'll include some info on this, but you can check it out at statsig.com/featuregates. Okay, so jumping into Q&A, we have a few audience submitted questions. Let me go in and dig these up. Okay, first one. Peter at Univision asks, when feature flag pass/fail populations aren't equal, how can we compare changes in absolute numbers adjusted for populations?
So I think this one is getting at kind of an example I gave earlier, actually, it sounds like. So they're saying the pass and fail populations are not equal in size, right? So you're at a 10% rollout, 10% of people have the feature, 90% don't, or 20 and 80, 70, 30, whatever it is. How can we measure the impact of that? Well, fortunately, Statsig makes this super easy. You don't really even have to think about this. So at each rollout level, we will store your pulse results. So if you roll something out at 10% for a week and then move it to 20%, we always let you go back to your previous results and see that. But our stats engine on the back end will actually account for the percentage rollout of that feature or experiment in the metric lift calculation. Now, if you are super interested in seeing the raw numbers, you can always click into any one of those results you have on your pulse metrics view. And in the details view there, you should be able to see, the total number of people exposed in the test and control group. And so you should actually see that if the control group was 9 times as big, you should have, 9 times as many units there.
Yeah, I find myself using that kind of detail view hover card a lot to just get, you see lifts, you see CI's confidence intervals, but you want to kind of gut check the raw number of units that went into that. It's pretty useful. So definitely, that's awesome. Our next question, Sam at Sky asks, how do you automate flag cleanup to reduce technical debt? So I think this is kind of alluding to one of the things we talked about earlier with flag lifecycle. And the different tools that we've exposed to manage that flag lifecycle. And, I think there's one world where you do it fully manually, which I kind of overviewed our process on our team of having a monthly meeting on the calendar and making sure that you're checking these. There's another world where, you kind of wait for Statsig to push you an alert, like a nudge. Hey, hey, MA, you have some stale flags that you should go and clean up. And then there's another world where it's fully automated. How would you fully automate this? This was just completely programmatic.
Yeah, coming at this from the SDK and APIs that we're working on every day, I think of our console API right away. And so this allows you to take, a lot of those actions that you can already do inside of the Statsig console just with a API request, right? And so whether that be creating a new gate, updating a rollout of that gate, updating the rules or environments that it's exposed to, or deleting a gate, you have all of that at your fingertips. And so I believe we actually expose like the number of checks that a gate is getting. So it would be a pretty easy automation you could build to actually, get your list of gates, see how many checks there are. This one hasn't been checked in a while and was created, 2 weeks ago, or whatever custom logic you want. And you could go ahead and just automatically issue a delete request for that gate.
That's awesome. Yeah, our console API is pretty powerful. It's cool that we have, the user interface that is well designed and easy and intuitive, but you can also do it all via API pretty much.
Yeah, we've been expanding its capabilities a lot recently.
That's awesome. Okay, well, that wraps up our, virtual meetup for February. Thank you everyone for joining. And just as a reminder, we'll be sending out all the information in the recording of what we talked about via email after the fact. So stay tuned for more follow-ups, and definitely check out the free feature management package at statsig.com/featuregates. And we will see you in the console.
Thank you.